You chase these feelings, these aspirations, and then you're not where you thought you would be. And people they're really lonely and they're hopeless because they were promised something. The majority of stuff in life is found in managing tension. We live in a heightened anxiety-filled world. We have no idea how to manage tension. And then we don't have resilience to manage tension of individualism, but also community. Hey guys, want to welcome you back to another episode of the New Rules Podcast, episode 24.
Kobe.
Shout out to my man, Kobe Bean Bryant, man, one of the GOATs, the greatest. So, hey, episode 24 is going to be a little bit different. We recorded episode, if you listen to episode 23, this idea of hope I can believe in. This episode ended up going a little bit longer. We were just flowing with some, I think, great content. So we decided just to turn this into a two-part episode. And so we're going to continue. We're going to jump right in. You know, we have our normal intro, things like that. I think our last episode, we gave you so much gold with our draft and stuff like that. And so, man, we're jumping right into it. Episode 24, part 2 of Hope I Can Believe In.
I feel like that is the key difference on how we define authenticity versus how the world standardly defines authenticity. Because I think, you know, we have this tagline that's kind of be yourself, be together.
Yep.
And so if you don't have the ability to be yourself around people who are different than you, not just around people, but around people who are different than you, to be quite frank, you don't really have a sense of self.
Yep. 100%.
And that's not authenticity. We live in this world where people are fooled that they're being themselves because they're just surrounding themselves with people who think like them, act like them, talk like them. And not only, I think, are people actively seeking that, we're also living in a world where that's being curated for us for the benefit of politics and the data that people get from our phones. So we have to actively, you know, fight against that because of the way that we're being set up and manipulated to live that way too. Yeah.
And the question I would ask you is because I think that in your kind of, you know, with coming up, you lived in the height of that, like in your developing years. So how has that affected like you? Because you lived in like the development years of your life under the real like height of like radical individualism and like things like that. So how has that impacted you?
So I would say a key difference, which we've talked about this, I don't think we've ever talked about it on air, is that there is the idea of generations, but that's also so different depending on the community that you lived in.
That's a great point, 100%.
And so while I did grow up at that time, my experience is so different from Peyton's, for example, which is Adrian's daughter, or even Brooklyn, even though, or even Jalen, like we talked about before, Jalen's 6 years younger than me, and we have such a different experience just because the area that I grew up in was a small southern town. So it was very much like, if you don't go to this church, if you aren't with the family at these times, on these days, doing these things, like you're shunned, and we expect you to grow up and be in this kind of, you know, profession and live your life in this sort of rhythm. Yeah. And so even though I'm doing what is like standardly accepted in society, even by, you know, parents of kids my age, that is not necessarily the case. Like it was a major disruption and it's taken time. Like, you know, even when I go home, it's like, when are you moving back? Yeah. And it's like, oh, that's not even how the world works anymore. Like that's just not how it is. So to answer your question, I think that whenever I left, Polk County to go to school, I had a very big culture shock because I was like, oh, everyone's just kind of like freely roaming around, and my conscience is like bonded and tied to like these people who live basically in the 1960s, who I love and are my family, but it's a very different experience.
No, and I hope everyone heard that. That's great wisdom and that's great insight, because I think it's so easy for us to say, oh, hey, Gen Z, even though you lived in America, you lived in a different type of America versus somebody who grew up in, like, say, Brooklyn, New York, or based off somebody versus on like your ethnic like upbringing. You know, my wife, me and her grew up differently. She grew up in, she's Chinese Jamaican. So when you grew up in a family that's from the islands, like, it's way more communal. It's way more involved versus me. It wasn't that way. It was a lot more separation. So I think so many times we have to be careful, just say, oh, Gen Z. It's like, no, it's actually, I think, how your community is going, because you can, again, like, Gen Z in Polk County and Gen Z in, let's say, Bangui, Central Africa, are two different things. You know what I'm saying? Central Africa, they're not like, oh, yeah, man, like, be whatever you want to be. It's like, no, like, dude, we're trying to survive, chief, let alone having the freedom to choose what I want,
Right. Or even Appalach,
Yes, yeah.
An hour away from here. Like, the experience of a Gen Z there versus even here is so different.
It is. And so I think that's where, so that's a great point to where that your upbringing was more of like, oh, kind of maybe a little bit like how, even though we're different in age gap, and you had the internet, you had social media, so there was different things there. But I was kind of like how even though I grew up and my family was different, but like that was kind of the overall like culture was like, man, it was family, like having an individual thought and doing that was a little bit, that was radical. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was radical to have that, that type of thought. Like, even there, like with you, when you decide to move, like there was like, oh, that was a radical thing, even though it seems like that's freaking normal. It's like, it's abnormal, it seems, for like people to like stay. But from where you're from, it's like, oh. And so I guess I'll even ask you that now, kind of moving from there, like, how has that been? Like, moving like away. And now I know you said you look back, you do that, but when you look back on there, is it one of those situations where could you imagine your life still being there?
I can imagine my life still being there. Yeah. It's not very pretty. I can imagine it. That's a really good question. It's so complex, I think that I do feel I completely understand why we have gone to radical individualism.
Yep.
I'll say that. I understand the impact of just like a family system that's in a cycle of you go there, you do this, and the way that it suffocates a sense of self.
Yep.
And so I completely agree with, self-expression, and I also feel that deeper because of how much and still doing it, like work that I've had to do to like dig and dig and dig, because we talk about your purpose being buried alive.
Yep.
And underneath a bunch of stuff. And so I do think that there's levels of the more high-end and codependent and enmeshed a centralized community is, the more work you're going to have to do to find your sense of self.
Yep.
Because you were never just an individual, you were always a part of a group.
Yep.
On the other side, there is something really sad and lonely about just spending the rest of your life on your own, chasing whatever feels right.
Yep.
There's something really sad and lonely about a lack of depth of relationships and a lack of loyalty. And I think that we've seen loyalty played out poorly, like abuse of power labeled as loyalty. And that's not actually what it is. Yep. But because of that pain, we will confuse long-term relationships and being loyal to someone who makes mistakes as somebody, manipulating you or,
that's a good point.
Doing wrong by you kind of thing. And so I think that because of the way that, we can be familiar to the pain of what that more centralized community can cause, at the same time we'll start, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, where it's like, I'm not willing to commit to anything, to anybody, to anything, no job, nothing. And there's no sense of commitment and loyalty, which I think is actually very lonely.
No, it is. And I think that's when we talk about this idea of hopelessness, where I think a lot of people are, because you've now chased you chase these feelings, these aspirations, and then you're kind of like not where you thought you would be. You thought that, oh, I'll be happy or I would be whatever, but we're seeing the opioid addiction at just a catastrophic rate. We're seeing, the abuse of other drugs, like at a high rate. And they're really lonely and they're hopeless because they were promised something of like, if I go do this, that's going to bring that. And it's that tension. Here's the thing, everything in life, majority of stuff in life is found in managing tension. It's managing tension of like of individualism, but also community. And I think that's where most of us, and we live in a heightened anxiety-filled world where we've talked about it, where anxiety drives us to black and white. So because it drives us to black and white now, we have no idea how to manage tension. And then we don't have resilience to manage tension, because sometimes in tension, you have to give some. So that means you have to eat it. You know what I mean? So for example, like if I was just living only for myself and that was it, then it was like, all right, well, my kids, it doesn't matter. Or my wife, it doesn't matter. You guys just whatever I want to do, you do that. No, there's that time where I've had to go through, where she had to go through seasons where Wendy had to she had to sacrifice. And there were seasons where I had to sacrifice. And there are seasons where our kids had to sacrifice. And all of that is learning how to manage tension versus living in these extreme places. And I think that because now life is going to make people have to do this, that's why I think people are very hopeless, because they don't know how to manage tension. They don't have resilience built within. We've talked about access points and what all that does, the overwhelming part. So it is all leading to these places of where I think that's the cry. The cry in our world today is hopelessness. I mean, I'm seeing it, Bri, like in corporate America, where you're having people who are wanting you to put rules and things in place for stuff that hasn't even happened, or even the company has shown any proclivity to do those things, because it's all fear. And that's what you start to see when you start hearing a rising mental health thing, when you start hearing the idea of fear a lot, people just wanting what I can't do, what I can't do, what I can't. Before, remember, it's like, man, I'm going to do all these things. Now I'm hearing, what I can't do. Oh, no, we can't do that. No, we can't do that. No, I can't do this. No, we can't do this. And you're just like, dude, this is crazy. I mean, and I'll say this, and this is a little bit controversial in the sense of I believe that's why remote work to me is a very dangerous thing.
Right.
Because it's another thing to make my life easier. Now, do I believe companies need to, if you're a company, you make people come to work, make your culture better. Oh, we got to come back here for company culture. Your culture blows. So, no, people don't need to come back for that. That thing sucks. Don't come back for that. But the fact of getting up, I think it's going to kill young men. Get up, freaking, you can't just sit there and smoke weed all day and then just wake up and roll over and just turn on Zoom and try to do your job halfway. No, go. You can't stay out all night. Get up, go to sleep, get up in the morning, put clothes on, go to your freaking job, learn how to interact with people. I think we're building more and more the idea of less resilient people, because we don't have to. Yeah, it sucks to have to commute. Mm-hmm. It sucks to have to, maybe go into a job and work at a cubicle that you don't love. But all those things, you learn how to be responsible, accountable. It's the fact that it builds something in you. And I think we just are not building people that way. Mm-hmm. And the more and more things happen, the more and more I think people are going to struggle. I think if I was mentoring guys, I would tell them, man, listen, I wouldn't. If somebody came to me, a young man, young woman, that's why we do it here. We don't do remote work here. And it's not because I'm not a guy who cares in technology. I actually believe that. I actually believe we have hardworking people here who would do their job really well working remote. But it's something about being in proximity. It's something about being around each other. Something about having to show up that builds. And I believe I have a responsibility as a leader to build authentic leaders. And one of the things is resilience. And I think being able to show up every day. We have check-in, 9 o'clock here. Why? Not because I'm trying to be a tyrant. I'm no. I want people to know, man, you have to be accountable. Hey, we're here. We're ready to rock and roll, 9 o'clock. And I give people, here's the thing, but here you got a lot of freedom. I'm not sitting there checking, hey, where were you at today? No. Mm-hmm. Why'd you leave at 10 o'clock? People go to, they have appointments. They have freedom to go to. We encourage that, but we do have a check-in, and it's because I'm trying to build something. And I think that's really, really important for people. Yeah.
And I think that's some of the value in knowing who you are so that you can have values and run it through that grid, because one of our values is development.
Yeah.
And so because of that, we just don't think we would be able to do that at the same capacity. And we know we want to be able to do that at the same capacity without having everybody here.
Yep.
And what we could easily say, though, and what's happening in the world is well, everybody's doing remote work. If we want to start being more competitive, if we want to start being more important, we need to come up with a really good model to remote work. And then maybe we could be the ones for everybody else to replicate the really good model for remote work. Like all of those ideas start going through your head. And I feel like that's actually happening on an individual basis, because not only does community, do the whole iron sharpening iron thing, it also gives you a measure of success.
Yep.
Based off of who you are, I would say, because you have more people to help, run it through the grid. So now you have somebody, like, we don't need any more world travelers.
Dude.
I need a technician. I need a hairstylist.
Plumbers.
Like, there are so many things that we need. And so that is some of the beauty in how things were in the levels of community, because it's like your measure of success was not based off of the pressure of being seen on social media every day, having followers. Like, not everybody was made for that pressure, and everybody is trying to be made for that pressure, and it's absolutely crushing.
I want to say something
souls.
about what you just said about the idea of, like, man, everybody doesn't need to be a world traveler. Listen, there's something, I can tell you this. I am a better leader and I'm a better man because I planted roots in the city. I didn't want to be in Tallahassee, Florida. It's Tallahassee, Florida, right? Yeah, it's the capital, but, like, it's not like, I mean, I'm a creative. Like, I think of cities like Paris. I think of Miami. I think of New York. I think of LA. I think of places like that. For the way my brain, like, works. DC, like
Portland
for sure. Yeah. But here's the thing. I have learned, man, being in a place that at times where I'm like, it was honestly, I felt like God told me to be here. And so I came here. And here's what it did. It built something in me. To lay down roots, to learn how to build something, to learn how when things got tough, no, I can't leave, to fight through when I go look at commercial real estate, and, like, I would go, if I had a commercial real estate, my first person who was a commercial real estate person was black, and then how they would look at me, and then realizing, like, okay, I could just say, screw this, let me go to a city where there's actually more black people, more, like, favorable to black people, let me do that. No, I had to figure it out. I had to figure out, how do I get this done, what I'm trying to get done. But that has built some things inside of me. It's built toughness in me. It's taught me how to think creatively. It's allowed me my purpose and calling of writing new rules, helping people think different outside the box. I've had to do that because I've learned how to think outside the box. So my purpose and calling has been formed and shaped in this city. Also, people don't this is what I call a secondary city. This isn't a primary city. So I've also had to learn, I care about that, because I've realized, like, man, God has put me around, like, secondary, like, kind of leaders who sometimes people would gloss over, who I think, although they're like level 5 leaders, they just need to be developed. So I think this whole thing of people traveling everywhere and I want freedom, it's like, dude, sometimes put your roots down and do that. I tell that to young men. Like, sometimes these, like, guys who are waiting, and again, for whatever, to each your own. You don't have to be complete to be married. I don't believe that at all. I think that's been a false thing. But what I will say is that sometimes when I listen to guys and I'm asking them, like, they're like, yeah, I want to be married one day. And they're, like, in their mid-30s and things like that. And they're not like, okay, they have no like options. They just choose not to commit because they're looking for this, like, this person who fits this and this. I'm like, no, like, you need to just commit to someone, go through life with someone, suffer with someone. It builds you into a better person. And the lack of putting roots down in places, I think it's made us feel like, oh, we're just unique and we're travelers, but it's built a less resilient people, which is, I think, has built a lot of false people. That's why in corporate America, there's just not a lot of really good leaders, because I don't think there's a lot of tough people that have resilience there. So I think, man, stop traveling, man. Freaking sit somewhere and build something. God, it drives me nuts. Like, go build something. Yeah.
This is a crazy question, potentially not crazy question.
Let's do it.
Part of why we even have the ability to do that and live in that way is because just the level of access, especially if you're middle class and up.
Yep.
Do you think that something's going to happen that will just, especially from more of an American standpoint, that's going to potentially strip us of the more global access that we have, whether that be crash of the internet, something with traveling, similar to COVID, something we could never expect that just shut things down.
These are just all hot takes I have. So they're hot takes. There's no real whatever. Do I think we're going to experience in moments the internet like way more like outages? Yes, 100%. I think that's going to happen, and I think that's going to do what. We're not all built for that. You know what I'm saying? Dude, I just literally, as we're recording
I was about to say, as you say that.
I just left freaking vacation, and I was down in Destin Beach, that kind of Santa Rosa Beach 30A, and the house I was at, because the hurricane had come through, the house we were staying at, the internet for whatever reason went out. They tried to reset it, they could. So, and there's no real good cell phone service. So I had no internet for like 3 or 4 days. And you know what? It was one of the greatest things. Me and my wife talked about it, because Wendy always likes, I'm going to go on vacation, but this will kind of work. And she was like, I'm convinced you turned the Wi-Fi off on purpose so we couldn't do anything. But it ended up being good. But my point, though, is like, I was there. There was like times I was struggling. I'm like, man, freaking, I need to everything we do is on there, so it builds resilience. So I think that could be a thing. I think another one, as countries start to build different alliances, I think there will come a point in time where depending on what alliance, you may not be able to fly into certain countries. I think they're going to be more like kind of, one of the things that people talk about is like more another kind of like sickness that's going to come around the world. Like, one of they're talking about is the idea of like a tick-borne illnesses, especially around the idea of like meat. To where like that's becoming less and less of like, I know, I think it was last name McGonigan, I think, in her book where she I forgot her name, where she talks about like different, like
she's the same one who predicted
COVID, some type of COVID thing, and I'll get the name in a second for you guys, but she actually like I think there could be tick-borne. So like, what does that look like for people? What does that look like for an industry of a market of cattle? Of all of a sudden, if people are getting a tick-borne thing where they can't eat, meat starts to go down the track, that impacts farmers, that impacts the economy in a different type of way. I think as well, I think you're going to see a bigger separation between like those who have and have-nots. I really do. I think that like if you're already like middle upper class, if you're kind of like upper class, kind of like middle upper class, I think you'll kind of keep climbing. I think if you're like kind of lower, I think the gaps they're already starting to happen. The gaps are going to even be bigger, and I think the next big kind of fights and debates and riots and marches are going to be class-based. They're going to be class-based across the world, the haves and the have-nots, because I think that like that's kind of where the world's kind of headed. So I think those are going to be some things, and I think it's going to shake our world. I think our world will continue to just keep being molded and shaped. We even saw recently, what was it, China and Brazil, I think it's BRICS is what it's called, if I'm not mistaken, but like the alliances where they're going off of like the American dollar in their trades. That hasn't been done. It has not been done in like 50, 60, 70, I don't know how, like where trades are always between countries with American dollars. That's changed the world. The game is changing. And so I just think we're going to be living in a completely different world. And I think that we are going to live in I think America will be fine, but we'll have to just learn some different ways to be resilient and things like that. But I think hopelessness is going to continue to keep being built, though.
The conversation as a whole, I mean, I'll be honest, it makes me anxious. Yeah. My hand's not in the pot of trade. And I don't trust the people who are. Yeah. So no matter which direction it goes, I think that it is something that if everyone takes a second and thinks about it, it does initially hit you as like rightfully so. It should be scary.
I mean, I want to tell you this. Think about this. I mean, one of the spaces we're in, a place that should be a place of hope that I listen to people and they are more hopeless than ever before. It's the church. Because I think the church has fell into a lot of the same, like they've fallen a lot into the same thing the society's fallen into. Radical individualism. When the market's up and to the right, ties are good, and they have to think different. Listen, one of the things that the church is not prepared for is that the biggest segment of people who give to the church are all dying. They're all dying. Boomers. They're all dying. And here's what's going to happen. And Gen Z, millennials, and Gen X do not give at the same percentage. Most of the times what happens is that when you get old, they may start giving like more money, but they're only like you don't see the percentages of wealth go with it. You may see more money given because they're making, but they're only giving 2%, so they're going to stay giving 2%.
Oh, is it because they spread it out?
Yeah, well, like, for example, no, like boomers gave like at a 10 to 12%, kind of 8 to 12% clip, if I'm not mistaken. Like, even when they weren't when they were in their 20s, they were giving at that, because that was the big thing. They were giving at an 8 to 10 to 12% type of rate. So when they started making more money, they still were giving at that same level. Where they're saying, I think it's like, millennials, Gen Z, it's like 2%. So even though they'll make money, it is, you start getting in your 30s, you make money, you're still probably only going to give it 2%. So that's a huge cliff, and the church is not prepared financially for that. So it's all about, and so we build buildings, we have buildings that sit there, and so that's where, for me, and you've seen this, why we've thought about it differently. We don't have a building that sits there. We have a building that's being used 7 days a week, and it's and on the other side of it, we're getting half the rent, the utility stuff paid for, and we're able to make some money from it because we're not just sitting there with it. Our next building we get, it's going to be something that is really a tool, something that's used for our city. It's not going to be a church building. I think it's, again, and I don't care. I got people do this, you say whatever. I think it's stupid. I think it's dumb. And when I say this, let me be careful. I think there's importance to having, this is my rant, a church building that I think, when you look back on it, where there's the architecture of a church building in the city, downtown, and things like that. I used to kind of be against that. I do think it's good. I think it's okay to have a building, a church, like the architecture, the things like that, to show, no, there's a church in this city. So I want to be careful with saying, you shouldn't have a church building, Do what you have to do. But churches are going to have to think differently, or they're going to have to shut their doors because money will not be what it is.
Yeah. Makes sense. Do you, maybe you may or may not know this, do you know if the 2% is because they are actually giving less, or is it maybe they're giving 10%, but they're giving 2 here, 2 there?
I think it's
just less.
It's just less. Yeah. It's just less because it's not a part of it's not a part of the cultural norm.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about the problem.
Yeah.
What do you think the solution is?
I think the solution is what this podcast is about. I think it's leaders. I think leaders build hope. I think, but it's hope that's grounded in reality. But you can't ground people in the reality if you're not grounded in reality. That's why we define it as we talk about this. We define authentic leaders as people who are self-aware, have resilience to remain self-aware, and they empower others. And so I think that in a world that's hopeless, right, where we're hitting all these changes and shifts and people in their own souls and their own hearts and their own minds are going to a place of hopeless, I think leaders are the ones who can build hope, because in moments like this where it seems like there's no way out, leaders find ways and leaders point in those directions. But for leaders to do that, they're not pointing in a false direction. They're not saying, hey, this is the best life ever. They may say, hey, no, we're heading over here, and there's about to be a lot of stuff we're going to have to walk through. Man, you know what? We may get, there may be a ditch over here that we may get stuck in, and we're going to have to fight through that. We may have to go blah, 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 whatever it is. But leaders lead, and they speak to reality. They're grounded in reality. And so I think when you're grounded in reality, there's hope that's there. We just have lived in a place for so long where people have been grabbing to aspirations and things that are not grounded in reality. And so I think the hope is authentic leaders. And so I think it starts with the individuals who are willing to be self-aware, have resilience, remain self-aware, and willing, that power that they do have, they're willing to actually give it away and help develop other people. And I think that's where hope can be built. Hope is not going to be built with, oh man, you're going to make $1 million business or a $5 million business. It may be, hey, hope is grounded in helping people realize, man, living within their means, and right now being that school teacher in this place is so helpful right now. Or like you said, being a technician, being a painter, being a plumber, man, being an electrician, whatever, that's really needed right now, man. Being in janitorial services, being, man, somebody who may be somebody who may be a garbage man. We need that firefighter, policemen, policewomen, whatever. All those things are needed. And I think grounding people into reality of working hard, man, building a good life, still being able to be living out of you. I think because this is important, and I know I'm saying a lot, but this is important. Like, you can have, like, remember, we don't chase jobs, we chase calling. So, like, you know what, man, like, you could be a policeman, you could be a technician, you could be this, and that you can live out of your purpose doing that job. So that's what I think is going to ground people. It's like, no, stop. It's not about this type of job that gives me a status. Can I live my calling and purpose out of that job, no matter what that job may be?
Boom.
Boom. That's a lot. I know. What do you have anything you want to add to that?
I think that for everyone who spends so much of their time in life crapping on who you view as the leader and the person of power.
Yeah, I have a point to say to that. Keep going.
This is your time.
Dude,
this is your, like,
yes.
If you're mad, step up. Like, be the one to live with integrity. Be the one to have solutions. Be the one to do it. And if you aren't doing it in the sphere that you find yourself in right now, please understand that you would not be the answer if you were put in their position either.
That's it. Bri, listen, you have spoke to something that is, I think, is very important. What you're about to find out is who actually are leaders and who are not.
Yeah.
The world has said that the world's been full of leaders. It hasn't. It's been full of managers. It's been people who've managed a system. Now you're going to see. You're going to see in crisis who leaders are. Leaders lead in crisis. Managers manage when you get through a crisis, or once a system's in place by a leader, then they manage it. And that's the world we've lived in. And so everyone, you said, they complain, they moan about, oh, I don't see this. And I'm saying, okay, now let's see. And here's the thing. What world are you in right now? Go change that one. Mm-hmm. Go impact that community you're in right now. Those 5 direct reports you have, are you changing their lives right now? That's what it's going to come down to. And it's people grounded into understanding who they actually really are. And if you can do that, I'm telling you, there's so many opportunities that are going to be there. But here's what it's about. Real leaders in these moments are taking their power and they're giving it away. They're helping others be better. The mark of a leader is this. Who is there? Who's coming behind you? Who's moving in a direction because you're there? What space have you created that's allowing there? What people have left? I tell people, you may only have 1, 2 people who report to you. Is their life better? Is their family better? Is their marriage better? Are their relationships better because you're around them? Are they growing up where they've needed, things to be better, maybe in their mental health? Have you helped them? What are you doing with your power? And again, that's what we're about to find out. We're going to see who's actually the real ones and who are not. And those who are willing to do that, I think you're going to have a chance, because here's what I believe. I believe in crisis moments like this, crisis moments where the world's been fed fake. What's going to produce is just real. It's people, they don't want cotton candy anymore. Mm-hmm. Now, people are going to still go after it and want, they're going to listen to these, stupid Instagram influencers who say stuff that like it literally sounds deep. It's not very deep. But people are actually looking for people who are going to say, and here's what it's going to be. And you said it. It's not, I don't think it's going to be the most charismatic people. It's not going to be the person who looks a certain way. Mm-hmm. It's going to be the person who are the most non-assuming people in the world. It's going to be that person with 100 followers on who's not even on IG that much. He's just on there to get memes, you know what I'm saying, to share with his friends to be funny. But he's a guy who's out there, legit changing the world, impacting lives. It's going to be that business that's not a giant tech company that's just building, they're a painting company in a community, but man, they started now 10, 15, 20, and they're empowering. It's going to be companies I'm blanking on this coffee shop that I went to in Jacksonville, Florida. But their whole premise behind this coffee shop was kids with Down syndrome. And it was started, and I know you'll have you look it up real quick. It's, oh man, I'll keep talking to you and you can But like this coffee shop, and now they've like franchised this coffee shop, and I went into this coffee shop, and it was freaking phenomenal. Like the service.
Is it Biddy and Bose?
Biddy and Bose, yeah. And so it is like, it started from a couple who had 2 children, if I'm not mistaken, who were both had Down syndrome, and so they built it for that community. But when you go there, it's not where you're in there, and they have people who have Down syndrome working, and they had someone helping them, and and I'm sitting in there, this coffee shop, and I'm like, you know me, I'm not like I'm not super emotional about certain things, crying. I'm in there having to fight like tears because I'm like watching this older lady work with this one young man who had Down syndrome, and she's teaching him, and he's doing this, and he's like, man, and he was taking pride in like he know this one coffee that he loved to make, and I'm watching it, and I'm like, that's it, and this company is thriving because it's real. Like it's not like it, and it's done at such a level. That's the stuff of the future. It's people who are doing real things that add real value to people's lives, not this fake crap we have lived in for so long. And so go meet needs, be excellent at it, lead out of who you are, and just watch what'll happen. I'm not promising you that you're going to be on the cover of like freaking Inc. magazine, or you're going to be on the cover of a Fast Company. But what you will be, I think you'll be somebody who leaves a legacy, that the world will be better in this time, and to where when you're dead and gone, people are like, oh man, when this person did this during this time of crisis, I found hope, because that's what people are looking for. And so I tell people, I'm melancholy as all get out, but I have more hope than I've ever had in this moment for the future, because I believe that there's so much that people can really anchor into, and you can really help them. And so I'm excited. It's going to continue to get harder, but I actually think that if we can be grounded to reality, I think we really can see some things change. There it is. Well, guys, hey, I hope this was helpful for you. Make sure you give us your feedback. I mean, I would love to hear from you. I mean, you can always DM us the easiest way on Write New Rules, at Write New Rules on Instagram, or at Write New Rules on TikTok. Again, that is one of the best ways to be able to connect with us there, and let us know what you're thinking. But again, we want to see where you've seen this hopelessness playing out, but also where you have hope. What are you doing? What are you building? What in this podcast has helped? And now we want to inspire you. Go. Be grounded to reality. Go out there, change, share with people you feel like can help. Until next time, keep writing new rules.